four, three, two, one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Project Egg Show. I'm your host, Ben Gothard, and today we have the honor of speaking with Jennifer Kim. How you doing today, Jennifer?
Hey, Ben. Awesome. I'm loving life today. How about you?
Well, you know, I feel like I'm doing great and I'll get better as the day goes on. So thank you so much for carving out the time. I really appreciate it. And I have to ask, what is your story?
Mm, gosh, let's see. The long story, the short story, Ben.
The longest one there is.
Well, great. So, hi, everyone. I'm Jen Kim, and really, I'm on a mission to help people be themselves 100%, be completely expressed. And the best mechanism that I know how to do that is entrepreneurship, because I believe that entrepreneurship is the biggest personal development journey you could ever be on. And so, you get the benefits of whatever your values are: freedom, lifestyle, autonomy, but you also get to own your own decisions, both good, bad, indifferent, ugly, beautiful, all the things. And so, with that kind of as my reason for what I do in the world, if you backtrack, the story, I always tell people that I'm a seasoned chicken, not a spring chicken. So I've been doing this for 20 years now. Oh my gosh, really aging that. But I also am really grateful for the wisdom that I've gotten to experience over those years, and also what I get to continue to teach others forward and whoever I get to touch. So Ben, it's really cool that Project Egg gets to really touch people in so many ways in that way. So, because I think one of my biggest things is seeking wisdom and I think a lot of people are seeking mentorship. And rolling back 20 years, that was my thing. I grew up in Hawaii in a very small, tiny town, population still not more than 4,000 people. And I was born of immigrants from the Philippines who are came over to work in the sugar and the pineapple plantations at the time. And I remember, Ben, when I was growing up in that little city, I really felt like a fish out of water. I felt like I didn't belong. And it's not that but at the same time, I got so many great benefits from that, because I learned humility. I learned about, the power of the effort you put in to things. I learned obviously the power of family and close community. And so, but to be honest with you, at the time, I didn't feel like those were good things, because I was this really big, worldly, heady child. I came out of my mom's womb that way, and it was like they didn't really know what to do with me. To be honest with you, I admit that I was that kid. And they were like, "What are these things you're speaking of?" And I would talk about the world and how I wanted to see it. And, one of my favorite things to do in the morning was to drink Lipton hot tea with my grandmother, who had a fourth grade education, but she was an entrepreneur. She left the sugarcane and plantation fields. Now, she would never tell you, Ben, that she would never describe herself as an entrepreneur. She would just say, I basically made a choice that I felt was better for my family, which is she became one of the first three people in not just the state of Hawaii, but actually the United States, to start care home business in her home. Because back in the early 60s, they were looking for people to take care of elders. And hospitals were overwhelmed. They didn't have the capacity. And still that case today. Well, my grandma was one of the pioneers of that industry. But the funny thing is, she would never again say, to her, that was her job. To her, it was, oh, now I don't have to go pick pineapples and harvest sugar. Instead, I can work at home and do a very hard job taking care of, elder people, four of them in our house. It was weird because even my friends didn't want to come over to play because they were kind of scared of these old people that lived in our house. And so again, I learned how to connect with people who also people were scared of or nervous around or didn't understand. And because I always felt misunderstood by my peers, again, it really helped shape who I was. And then so there's a part of the story that because I was so odd, weird, misfitted, asking really weird questions. You know, I went to a Catholic school where there were only 17 of us in class and nobody questioned the dogma or the religion and I would always ask questions like, why can't the priests get married? And, like I would just ask these questions, and in second and third grade, the nuns would be like, what's wrong with you, kid? Like, just follow the process. Right. And I was like, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm honestly curious about why the world in my world is this way. And I think that, and what that made is I also became somewhat of a pariah, because when you ask a lot of questions, when you're curious about things, people start to label you either a troublemaker or an outsider. And I was that. And I was heavily, heavily bullied as a result. When I was a young girl, I would hide in my house, Ben, from the outside world because, I literally, little girls would beat me up. And I spent summers without hair on my head between the age of like 7 and 14. And during those tentative years in your life, it's such an important period to get self-esteem and confidence. And I feel very lucky because even though I feared that outside world, but I was blessed with this weird obsession with understanding how the world works, that there were 3 things. My grandmother's newspaper in the morning with that Lipton hot tea, who she said, I don't know and understand everything that's going on in this newspaper, but I think you can catch on. And I remember reading the business section of the newspaper, and back in the day when there were newspapers, and when the news honestly was a little bit more truthful, right? It just really displayed facts and what was going on in the world back then. And I started to get really interested in business for, I don't know why, because it wasn't something, again, my grandmother, what her business was looked like a job to me every day. She never described herself as a business owner. And then, so it was my grandmother's newspaper and 2 incredible men who were my solace, and they were on TV. They were on PBS, and they were, Mr. Fred Rogers from, if you guys don't know, Fred Rogers is one of my heroes, and Dr. Wayne Dyer. And those 2 figures on PBS, Wayne Dwyer taught me about possibility, and Fred Rogers taught me about kindness in a world that didn't feel like it was possible or kind. And so that's another influence, I would say, as a young person that that really helped shape who I am. And then the third piece was I'm a bibliophile. Like my happy place is a bookshelf, and having, 2 covers between my hands and quiet. And so I became obsessed with reading, and I used the library as my respite. I'd bring all these books home, I'd read. And so those 3 things really helped me discover the world beyond what was my environment. And I, as a young person, decided I was going to either be one of 2 things. One was either I was going to be Annie on Broadway, like I was going to become a performer on Broadway. I'd never been to New York, but I was like, I want to go to New York and I want to experience that. And then, secondly, polar opposites, is I thought, I'm going to be the general counsel for Coca-Cola International. And when I was 9, that's what I told the nun in 2nd grade that I was going to be. I'm sorry, when I was in 4th grade. When I was in 4th grade, I told, like between 2nd and 4th grade, what's the number 1 question you're asked in school? What do you want to be when you grow up? Right? And while all the boys were saying they wanted to be firefighters and police officers and doctors, and the girls were saying they want to be teachers and nurses and moms, I got up, again, only 17 kids in my class, and said, I want to be the corporate general counsel for Coca-Cola International. And you can imagine how, first of all, the nun's like, here you are saying weird shit again. I'm sorry, I hope it's okay. I said, of course the nun didn't say the S word, but you know what I mean? Like, she was basically going, here you are, making a fool of yourself. Why are you saying these words no one understands? And I actually got sent to the back of the room. I was shamed for declaring that this was my big dream of growing up. And I remember going home defeated, just devastated. And I remember my mom, because they called my mom and said that I was acting up in class. Even though I was a straight A student, it was like, my mom's, just said to me gently, I'm just curious, what is a general counsel? And I said, Mom, it's the top attorney in any company. And she said, okay, so two things, honey. One, why didn't you just say you want to be a lawyer? Because that's already radical enough for a woman. And here was my mom who just wanted to keep me safe. But I was like, wow, I'm getting in trouble because I'm being specific. That's weird. Okay. And number two, she said, and by the way, like, how'd you come up with that? And I said to her, well, I read the paper with grandma every day. And I read this article that Coca-Cola International is the biggest brand in the world. And I figure attorneys are pretty important people. At the time, this was my perception and my impression. And also, Coca-Cola International means that it's worldwide. So I'll get to travel and I'll have an important job and I'll get to work with all kinds of different people. And it was cool that my mom asked me that, because my teacher was not interested in even hearing my reasoning or my why or the context. But again, it's like, back to my story, and I like, this is just the seedling. So you said it all. So I just wanted to give you, I think that a lot of times, in fact, I know that each one of us grows up and we're fed a lot of PB&Js, right? Not the sandwich, but actually perceptions, beliefs, and judgments of others, right? That we eat and then we consume, and then we start believing those perceptions and judgments and that dogma. And lucky for me, with Dr. Dwyer and Mr. Rogers and my grandma, I, pursued going to college. I, went to school by accident in the Silicon Valley, during the time of what we call the first innovative boom. Again, I told you guys I'm a seasoned chicken. So this is back in the day when eBay was formed and Netscape. I know y'all don't even know what Netscape is, but it was the first real big browser, okay, before Chrome and Yahoo got started back then. And so I was part of the first wave of exciting innovation. Being a Generation Xer, I call us, no offense to anybody listening, the best generation. And here's why, because we are the last frontier of both what I call analog and digital impact. Because I got to live in a time when we actually used something called a telephone that actually like plugged into a wall. And when you picked it up and dialed a number, someone was home to answer. Like someone actually picked up and answered the phone. Okay. And I saw every evolution between when the Macintosh, as it was originally called, obviously, to, everything in between happen. And so I feel so grateful that I lived in that generation, even though we're the tiniest generation. We feel a lot of pressure because the boomers are such a big population and the millennials are such a big population. We feel so compressed because we're called the sandwich generation on purpose, because we're holding both weights. And I learned very quickly that I moved from thinking I was going to work for Coca-Cola because I was like a commerce or a food company to working in high tech. And because that's just the environment I was in. And so I started off my career as a junior copywriter for one of the biggest ad agencies in the world, Ogilvy, who, if any of you know David Ogilvy, he's kind of the master, the king of not just copy, but influence. Like today's copywriters and marketers still use Ogilvy's work to create influence. And so I was lucky to be at the ground floor. Now, let me be honest with you, junior copywriter really meant that I ran coffee for the account executives. I didn't really get to write much. But what I did learn is all of the psychological archetyping and methods that are used to influence the world, because marketing influences the world, whether we like it or not. It does. What stories, and that's why I'm obsessed also with, you're asking me about my story, but I'm obsessed with helping people tell theirs in a way that's authentic and true and useful, frankly, for their audience they're trying to bring in. Because storytelling without a purpose cannot, I believe, creates less transformation than storytelling with intentionality does. Like stories influence, they inspire, But especially if you're an entrepreneur, I truly believe that stories are the way that people really decide if you're for them or not. And so kind of fast forwarding to, that first job, I worked in the corporate world for 12 years. My last job was an executive in the marketing department for Verizon. And I found out after leading every big project they'd ever have, I was kind of like, I don't know if you're familiar with Scandal, the TV show, or like Olivia Pope. She's the protagonist in this TV show. Basically, she's the fixer. They call her the fixer. Like, she's the person they bring in the US government to fix all the chaos and stuff. And anyway, I've been called the Olivia Pope in corporate because I learned early on from a mentor, Ben, that if you want to ascend fast through the traditional corporate chain, take on the projects no one wants. And so I was and I still am today, a person that takes on projects that most people don't want. And it's allowed me to learn, transform, adapt, pivot. It's made me a better machine, if you will, in terms of my own personal goals, my own business goals. And the reason I left corporate, because I actually didn't think I was going to be an entrepreneur, Ben. I had no desire to be. Notice when I was younger, it had nothing to do with, I'm going to have my own business, I'm going to have my own life. I actually wanted to be CEO of a big company originally. And what happened was I got one of the biggest projects this company has ever done. It was very complex. A lot of departments and partnerships had to be made to make it happen. It was wildly successful. And upon completing that project with my team, I found out that I went back to my old job. They actually took me out of my current job to take on this project that was so important to the company because I was known as the fixer. And I went back to my old job, which I loved, my amazing team. And I found out that the person that I had mentored not only got promoted, but he received $100,000 raise. And I was never even considered for that opportunity, even though I had brought it to light. And in that moment, Ben, yes, was I having feelings of frustration, anger, and rage? The answer is absolutely hell yes. And it woke me up, like, to what I realized is that I was still being the Jen that I was as a young girl, still wondering and questioning whether my own self-worth was good enough for something bigger, because I kept taking things that on the surface looked fancy or special. But my truth was I craved autonomy. I realized that my highest value is autonomy, and that by working in a company like that, I actually had none. I was tolerating being second best. And I decided in that moment that I would make a plan to exit. It took me 9 months. I put some money aside. I got very disciplined around what I wanted to do. So there's a lot of stories. I'm sorry, mine is not as sexy, where I'm like, in a huff, I left and burned all my bridges and pursued entrepreneurship. Actually, no, I actually made a plan to leave and left and never looked back. And as a result of that, I own 3 companies. I have an incredible team working on our behalf. We're transforming the world through helping entrepreneurs get seen, heard, and paid. And we're happy, and entrepreneurship, when I say we're happy, I'm not saying entrepreneurship is easy. Entrepreneurship is actually much harder than my corporate job, FYI. Much harder, because I'm in charge of, in the beginning, you're the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the janitor, the CEO, and everything in between, right? You're cleaning up a lot of poop, and you're also like having to lead and inspire, right? And so it's, but I wouldn't trade it, because now at least I'm living by my values, which is autonomy. And it's, again, so I don't want to romanticize it. It's up, down, all around, but it's worth it. And I think that, that's why I chose entrepreneurship. And so there's still more there, but that's, I think, a good enough. Oh, I have to say one more thing. I'm also the mother to 3 amazing humans. 22, 18, and 4 years old. And I live in now the Silicon Valley. Now I live in both Hawaii and the Bay Area, and run my companies from both places. So that's who I am.
Well, I appreciate you telling the bigger version.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, on the you can absolutely speak freely. There's, you can say shit if you want to.
Oh,
Absolutely.
good. Yeah, I mean, isn't that nice? Well, I also think it's such a myth that people think that people don't swear if they're more professional and corporate. Do you know how much swearing goes on in companies? I mean, it's ridiculous. Like I had never been to a meeting in a company where people weren't throwing down the F-bomb, like when they're frustrated. So I just think it's hilarious. Some reason, like I have a lot of people who come from corporate and come into entrepreneurship, and they're so stuffy and they're so like, and I'm like, honey, you were talking like that in the corporate world. I don't know why outside of it, all of a sudden you think you can't. I think here's the freedom to do that. Again, obviously it has to be, I truly believe, don't create a persona of just F-bombing if that's not who you are. But if it is who you are, be intentional about shaping yourself in an authentic way. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
One of the very first things you mentioned, I believe, was owning your own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious as to why the word decision stuck out as one of the first things that you said.
Because I do believe that every moment we're choosing every moment we want to live. I mean, I believe that we're on this planet on borrowed time, right? There is a beginning and end on this plane of existence, whatever your belief system is, whatever, in terms of the meat sack that our soul is living in right here. Okay. It has an expiration in this plane of existence. And so when I think the most confident people, and I'm not talking about extroverted or introverted, I'm talking about confident in your own meat sack. Okay. People are decision makers, and they'll decide even when there's risk, because that's what life is about. And I've learned, I tell people all the time, if you really want to be successful, whatever your definition of success looks like, you have to be a decision maker. Choosing a decision versus choosing the middle, being a fence sitter. I always tell people, like, it feels the most pain is on the fence. Right? It's not on the two sides of the fence. It's actually on the fence because you're sitting with your legs straddled. That shit hurts. Am I right? Like, male or female, doesn't matter. It's painful. Okay. So like, you have to be able to understand that even if the decision that you make next in the moment may even seem like you may even find out that it was the wrong decision. Actually, that ability to keep moving forward and deciding is strengthening you, not weakening you. It may feel in the moment like even that decision you made was a step back, or it took you back. But the truth is, it was there to teach you how resilient you are, how not to do that shit again. Okay. Like sometimes you have to, not sometimes, a lot of times you have to actually fail to understand what not to do. And I think knowing what not to do is more important than knowing what to do. And the only way you can find out what not to do is to do it. So that's what I mean.
When you go about making a decision, and I realize that, there are many different types of decisions and many different facets of life, but I feel like there's probably some underlying process of how you actually go about making that decision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What is that process, and how did you develop that over time?
So I call it being values driven. Okay. So I actually have a process called values driven inside of my company. And it's actually, we don't necessarily even teach it outside in what I'd call like, you can't buy it kind of way. But it's part of the ethos of my company and our brand. And so I share it freely because I want people, it comes from that story that I said is, I realized that so many times we're results driven. Right. And the truth is, it's true. Like, results matter, especially if you're an entrepreneur. You can't live in the clouds and not care about things like revenue and sales and, all that. But when you're values driven, I believe that the results that occur are actually the results that make you stay in the game. Because if you're only focusing on results, but then to get to those results, they're not in your values or they're not on brand, you become either one of two things. Either you're a sociopath because you don't care if like, that you're hurting other people to get what you want. Or what's more likely is you'll actually start to feel this fatigue and overwhelm and ask yourself and question yourself, is it worth it anymore? You start to lose your passion, or you start to get distracted because it feels better outside of the stuff you've got to handle. And I say that because when you're results driven, you're taught that in corporate to be results driven, I feel like we have to undo that harm. That the reason is back to my story of figuring out that in the moment that I had done excellent work, got 5s on my performance reviews, which means I was always getting my bonuses, I had no good reason then to leave my job. I was making $250,000 a year in salary, with a 20% bonus that I hit every single year. I had a freaking parking lot with my name on it. Y'all, this is a big deal. Okay. When you're in your late 20s, early 30s and getting that type of accolade, I had no good reason to leave my job. But in that moment, I'm grateful that I took the moment and instead of reacting, I asked my body, how should I respond to this? I actually asked myself, how do I respond? And after I sought deeper, I realized that what's happening here is a values violation. So if you're listening, write that down, values violation. I think a lot of people, how you can find out what your values are? You find out what violates them. And so if you ask yourself, what are you tolerating? What are you allowing? What are you, and then it'll start to shape a good list. And you'll probably come up with, 20 plus words, that you care about. And so you're asking about my process. This is kind of the process. And I did that. I literally was journaling and going, okay, what's all this stuff? And then also, what are the benefits of actually being paid to stay here? And I'm not just talking about in a paycheck. I'm talking about we are paid in so many currencies, especially ego currency. Okay. And so how are all the ways, the benefits of my values being violated? There are benefits. When you're violated, okay, there are actually reasons you're staying in it, whatever it is in your life. And I started to write this list of what am I getting paid for in this? And I start to weigh, literally giving probability scores to it. Okay, so the weight of this currency I'm being paid for the parking lot name that says Jen Kem on it. And then I can proudly show pictures to my mom, who actually wanted me to work for the government to show that I'm important in the world, right? What was that currency worth to me? And I did this kind of scale around that. And that started to shape further what my true values were. And I realized after I had a list of 30 things that I thought I valued, after doing that probability score and it's subjective. It's not an objective thing because there's no such thing as assigned values. Well, there is, but that's someone else's. It's really about what is your true values. And I realized and came up with my top 5. And my top 5 values, they're actually behind me. If you can see, it's hard to see, but I actually have them. This is my home office. I'm broadcasting to you right now from my home office. And in our corporate offices in Honolulu and here in Walnut Creek, California, we have it much nicer, prettier on the wall. But my values are autonomy, justice, generosity, leadership, and legacy. And we define those values. I can define what mine mean right now. So autonomy for me is having sovereign control over my own time, energy, and money. So that's how I define autonomy for me. So justice is for me, anything that is unjust in the world. Our company's job is to show and help those that don't have equal footing in the world, in any way, shape, or form. That also got driven by the fact that, frankly, I mean, I want you to tell you this, Ben, I love men and I love women, meaning I respect both genders and anything in between. Okay. However you identify. And let's face it, men have an advantage basically everywhere, but especially in the corporate world. And so I realized, wow, like this isn't cool that Nick, who, by the way, we're still great friends. Nick, he still works for a company. And he's like, God, you really broke out and you did it. And he felt so embarrassed because he's not a jerk. It's not his fault that he got this promotion. Well, sometimes it is the person's fault, but in this case, it wasn't. I don't want to make him out to be a villain because it wasn't his fault. It was the system's problem. And so our company looks at like, what are systematic things that are in the way of people really rising and growing? And we want to create a community and a tribe that understands that. That's who we want to work with. That's who we want to play with. That's who we want to help inspire and help. So justice, that's our second value. The third value is generosity. Now, you remember my awesome grandma who I grew up with? Well, guess what her name was? Her name is Generosa. Her mother named her right, because my grandmother was the embodiment of generosity. And she taught me humility, how to choose the right things for yourself to support your family. And it's interesting because, again, she never thought of herself like that. But I saw, and now as a grown woman, see how her embodiment of generosity really helped me understand that there's nothing that I have that can't be given away. You know, we are a steward of the gifts, talents, skills, and experiences that we have. And it's our job to share them regardless of the outcome. And so generosity is our posture. The third is leadership. And that means I have a big belief in leadership of self over others, meaning, sure, a lot of people are put in the position of leading others, whether you're in a job or you have your own business. And then even if you only work with a part-time contractor to help support you in your business, everybody thinks like for me, the gift is in the leading of yourself, because if you can lead yourself and you can be honest with not just the things you're good at, but the things that you are a tricky little bitch about, okay, that you talk yourself out of, that you avoid, that, all those things. Like, leaders know that tension is required for change to happen. And so leadership, we encourage internally and externally. Leadership comes from, it's an inside job, not an outside title. Okay. And then third and fifthly is the legacy piece where, again, my meat sack has an expiration date. I want to make sure that I'm leaving a legacy now, because to me, legacy is not a future term. It's a now term. And so everything we do is connecting dots. And I believe that it's our job to divide breadcrumbs that people can follow so that they can figure out their own path. So back to when I got clear that these were my 5 values as a visionary, right? And me being a visionary in my business, I now run every decision, back to decision making, and now my values driven process. Every decision we make in my company, and frankly in my life, runs through these things. And if it doesn't fit, bye. Okay, we don't do it. It's a hard no in both my life and business. If it doesn't support those 5 values in a tangible way, then it's a no. And it has made my life so much more happy. Again, I have hard days. I have hard parts of days still. I'm not immune or innocuous to challenges, obstacles, bullshit, shitty people, all the things. We live in this world. You know what I'm saying? So I don't believe in bypassing reality. And all I'm saying is these values help me navigate them with more grace and more care for myself than without them. And so that's how I run my life.
When you were talking about the process that you went through of having those values violated and maybe not being able to articulate it at the time, but looking back, just accurately describing it as that, do you feel like you had to have gone through that violation in order to have that tension to kind of give you perspective of like, okay, this is something I care about. This is something or I care about more. This is something I don't care about as much. do you think you had to go through that pain and go through that process to figure those things out? Or do you think there's another way? And the reason that I ask is because I run into people all the time who think that they could just, like start here and then in a day, like hop over this shortcut here and then just arrive. Right. And so
Yes.
I'm curious, like, did you have to go through all that? Or do you think there could have been a different way?
I don't think there's any other way to learn what you need to know without having some challenge. Honestly, even all of us are here on this earth because we actually had to fight our way out to the world. We had to actually do you know how hard it is to come out of a woman? Okay. Like if you really look at the biology, I can tell you as a woman who's actually have 3 people come out of me that, not only was it tough for them, it was tough for me. Okay. And, we don't remember that, but it's actually inside of our DNA to understand that and every living thing on this planet has to struggle through something to get whether it's a plant to get through that top part of it, because they can die underneath the soil and you would have never known that they made it. But them coming through the soil is a huge transformation for that plant. Same thing for us. So to answer your question, no, I don't believe it. And I think that anybody who teaches you, this is my opinion, but I'm not afraid to tell it. Anybody who teaches you that you can bypass that work is the liar and a manipulative, is trying to feed what I call our outlier wishes. Okay. Marketers, and don't believe me if you don't want to, because I am a master marketer, but I'm going to tell you the truth. I believe in high integrity marketing is they're marketing to the lowest possible probability because they're activating the dreamer in us. And there's an integrity way to activate the dreamer, and there's a non-integrity way to activate the dreamer. And the dreamer is, oh God, I really want that thing, whatever that thing is, relationships, wealth, the body you want, the friends, the relationships, the relationship even with yourself or whatever your belief system is. We all want those things. And so I don't believe that you get the things you truly want without something happening first. One of my great friends and one of my mentors and one of my clients, she's all 3, Lisa Nichols. If you are familiar with her, she was in The Secret, and she owns a company called Motivating the Masses. She's one of the best speakers in the world. And she says, you can't have your breakthrough before the breakdown. The breakdown is what makes the breakthrough so potent. We have actually daily breakthroughs that we're probably not noticing because we didn't feel the edginess of the obstacle, but it's the ones that really have the edge on it, the barbs, the barbs and the rockiness of a bigger obstacle that we get through. Those are the moments, those are the stories that allow us to decide, is this going to be for me? And you can either let that big obstacle stop you, or you can find a way to go through it. The only way there is through, not around, right? And so I actually don't believe in that there is. I think maybe there are some special, special snowflakes out there that it happened for them 1, 2, but maybe like a lottery winner, you could say, but we know what happens to lottery winners. The majority of them lose their fortune because they haven't been equipped to understand, to even know what to do with all of that. And so we fantasize and romanticize those types of stories. But the truth is that humans were built for challenge. We were built for challenge. That's why we're still here and the dinosaurs aren't. Okay. We were built for it. Now we have to decide that we still want to live here. We have to decide that. And that's why things that are happening, that's why with my value system, it's so easy for me to decide very clearly too, who I invest in, who we give money to donate to, because we're looking for how can our personal values and other people's align. And once you start to align, because you don't have to have the same, but if you have aligned values, you can get through both obstacles and also celebrate victory together. So yeah, I don't believe in I don't put my money on outliers. That's what I'll say. But they do occur. Malcolm Gladwell, wrote a book on it. But the truth is they're an anomaly. And again, it's speaking to a part of our psychology that hopes and dreams and romanticizes and fantasizes.
So I want to ask you about kind of a difficult subject to tackle, and I want to ask because I'm fascinated to hear what your response will be, and I think a lot of people need to hear it, and it needs to be discussed more. But I meet a lot of people who, and it goes back to what you were saying, like in the corporate world, men have an advantage over women for sure. And I'm Jewish, and I know that a lot of people just hate me just because, right? And there are so many. But by the way, let me just say, I know that I am so incredibly lucky, and that so many people have it worse than me. I'm not trying to compare at all, but for people who maybe in a situation right now where they have every disadvantage possible, or they just have so many disadvantages. And what I've heard from speaking with people in situations like that is, oh, there's no way I could do it, or the odds are stacked against me, or I can't believe this other person has these advantages. How do you still work through this idea of being in control of your own destiny and being able to get wherever you want to go, even when you may start off with everybody, or it may seem like everybody's against you, or you have every disadvantage in life?
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? And obviously, since justice is one of my top values, I have very high opinions on how to manage that. So zero filter. Let's just put it this way. I want to say something and just reiterate what you said, Ben. The truth is that the system in general is very much set up for a minority to be in charge. That's just the truth. And it's been that way since actually, if you look back at, the interesting thing is, if you look at facts, this all came from one moment in time. And it was when the Catholic Church decided that the way that religion should be. And it caused wars between Muslims, Jews, Christians. And why do I bring up religion? Because I know that's you're not supposed to talk about religion or politics, but I believe that if you're a true leader, you're not afraid to talk about it, because that shit's running our world. Okay. Like these belief structures and these systems, politics, governments, as well as religions, are actually, to me, the two main things that have caused chaos in the world and caused this disadvantage for pretty much everybody who's not white and has a penis. Okay. That's the truth. It was set up like that. Okay. So the truth is there are advantages for others, and it's true. So I'm just going to say that. And if you're not in that category with that, which actually most of us aren't, I just think it's funny too, how like Christians, and again, like talking about a girl who went to Catholic school and my whole family's Catholic. I'm just going to say, man, we messed some shit up, because let me tell you this, Jesus Christ was a Jew. So he would have never called himself a Christian. So just FYI. So anyway, this is how storytelling has become so critical, because we get to change the narrative if we do so as a collective, but it starts with you, leadership of self. So the answer is yes, you are at a disadvantage. If you're feeling like that, if you're listening right now and you're listening to this, I want to acknowledge you are disadvantaged. And I want to invite you to find people like us. Find the others. Get out of the environment that you're in, okay? Because it is set up for you not to succeed. And there are people like me, like I'm assuming Ben, I'm assuming like others, that actually believe that on the other side of that darkness is an opportunity for you to shine. And it's not easy, and you don't deserve that it's harder for you. That's the other thing. You don't deserve that. And the only way we had to shift it is to actually make a radical shift of ourselves, and to say, because it's scary, just like me, Jen Kem, being a little second to fourth grader, telling the nuns in my school, like, I'm just curious, why is it this way? And then to feel, I understand what that feels like. Again, and also I come from a minority, but I am definitely not a Black woman. I am not a Hispanic woman. I am not an Indigenous Native American woman. And those three categories are the most disadvantaged in the Western world. And so, that's why I love our community, because I just got to speak to that. It's like, we are the most diverse community that people tell me all the time. They're like, how did you do that? And I'm like, I'm just being fucking me. Like, I believe that we all belong. And I believe that we all have the opportunity to create autonomy financially, health-wise, spiritually. Like, you can be an autonomous individual and still believe in God. You can still believe in Jesus. You can believe in whoever you believe in. But you don't have to let the rules of those things change the way you are. And I just want to acknowledge that it sucks that you have to work harder. And you know what helps? If you have the right people around you who aren't just BSing you. Here's what's also important. Choose mentors, choose environments where the mentors can't be tempted by the motive to stay in power. One thing that I see, it's so frustrating online, is a lot of people buy things from people, and I'm not questioning because I don't know a lot of the people they're buying from, but I can see the systematic issue, which is you buy from somebody who actually is a person that their only incentive is to stay at the top. And there are gurus out there right now that are like that. And you have to be careful of guruism. Like, what's the difference between guruism and cultism versus like belonging in a real community? It's hard to see. There's a lot of blurred lines nowadays. And so that's why deciding the environment you're in, if you have values, run them through that. Does this community support my value of autonomy? Does this community support my value of justice? Does this community support my value? And it doesn't mean they have to have exactly the same values, but is there an alignment? Is there a linking that makes sense? Because there's beauty in diversity, and not just obviously for our skin color or our religious upbringing or our ethnic upbringing, but also diversity of ideas, diversity of industry. When we're too much in like one thing, we all become fascist nationalists in a lot of ways in the environments we're in. If we don't see, we become captured by, even how I was in that 4,000 person town, like everybody thought the same. And I was one of the only weirdos that didn't. And I didn't know anybody except for my grandma and two men on PBS who could help me understand the world a little bit better. And I feel blessed to have had that opportunity. Who knows? Because I know that there are some people that don't even have that. And so I just want to say that it sucks that you have to go through it. And I think that there is a path, if you're around the right people, to shorten that agony. And I hope that you can find those people. And if you can't, create your own. Build your own thing that then you can say, look, these are the people I want. So, and ask and invite, and know that frankly, rejection or isolation or silence is part of the journey too. People aren't going to get it at first. People didn't get Nelson Mandela. They never thought that they could, take down apartheid in South Africa. And here's the thing, it's still problematic, even though it's been banned. What the DNA of South Africa continues to have all of that history, and it's being undone brick by brick, person by person. And so, and by the way, since we're speaking, and since you said that you're Jewish, Ben, I think the Jewish people are a great example of, you want to talk about resilience, like, and some people would say, for religious reasons, they hate you. For actually, some it's sad because a lot of people who are in the minority don't like each other, because they're like, you shouldn't have an advantage. Why did you guys get okay? And then we're still in the shitter. And it's partly because if you if you want to be really good at understanding the world, study history, study the why it happened. Jewish people in general, they use their faith as a connective tissue inside. That's the reason, based on my studies. I'm not Jewish, but I'm obsessed with human behavior. This is my job in the world. I'm a brand strategist. I'm a brand futurist. All I do is study how humans behave, act, and buy. And it has a lot to do with that stuff. So I'll look at the African-American community. I'll look at the Hispanic community. Why do they make decisions? A lot of it has to do with that connective tissue. And so if you're in the category where you feel like, well, how come we can't have an advantage? Be the one to say, we need to align here. We need to link arms. And here's how we link arms. And then you create alliances. And you look for the people that are in the advantage category who want to be the helpers, that they actually want to be allies. They just are a little nervous because they don't know how to do without looking like they're colonizers, right? Nowadays, it's so tricky. It's such a treacherous trickery tsunami of crazy in order how to like navigate all that. But I want to invite you that the more you speak through your values, the more you decide through your values, the more people will see your truth and decide if they want to align with it. So it's not easy, but I do believe it's possible. And it starts in your own community. It doesn't start usually at the global level. Change happens in your backyard. Change happens in your meat pod, your meat sack right here. That's where it starts. And then you go and look at your neighbor. Like I think about Fred Rogers. I think about my grandma. Like it starts there. And then that's, again, we like to sometimes go, I want to be this global phenomenon. I want to like be this, I want to have this global business. And I'm like, great. And you know what? There's so much impact right next door. And you're too afraid to shake your neighbor's hand. We're too afraid to even talk to each other anymore. It starts there. So that's what I'd say.
Well, again, I want to thank you for the really expanding on the answer, because it really is such an important topic that I feel like a lot of people are scared to talk about. So, I just want to acknowledge you and say thank you for being willing to go there. And I also want to kind of comment on one of the things or a couple of things that you said as far as the Jewish people go. There's absolutely a very tangible bond between, I know that when I meet a fellow Jew, instantly there is at least some base connection there that I can't really explain, but it's just there. Mm-hmm. It's just there. So I wanted to comment on that. And the second part was, talking about how it is difficult to at least to start. If it's very difficult to start, and I really don't think it gets that much easier. Like, I think our ability to, we get stronger. And so I don't think the journey gets any easier. I think we just get stronger and more capable. We start to build momentum. But I also think it's worth talking about. Is it worth it? I mean, because what we're talking about, at least to me, one of the core things is really devoting your life to living in a different way and changing your life in a very meaningful and very, very radical way. And so, I just want to ask your perspective of, is it worth it?
I think your values are the answer to that. I think if you know your values and you even take even a part of what we talked about today, just kind of, even if I don't know if you're able to even like scroll back and listen to my steps to kind of unpack what your values are. I think your values have the answer of whether it's worth it or not. And I also believe two myths that are happening that I want to just share real quick that I think supports that is there's a very dangerous phrase that's being used today that goes a little something like this, that it has to feel good for you to do it. Okay. If everything felt good, first of all, us as humankind would not exist. That's just absolutely true. It is medically proven, scientifically proven, that if there is no chemical struggle in what you do, there is no growth. Growth doesn't happen. So the entire human race would be in atrophy and we would have died a long time ago. It's still true today. So when people say it has to feel good, I always am like, oh, there's a nice little bypassing that's a little nice bypassing comment from probably somebody who's in a privileged class. Because entrepreneurship, the work itself, the stuff that sometimes we have to bootstrap up and like just get it done, that doesn't necessarily feel good. But I always ask myself, is it in alignment with my values? And then on the other side of the effort, is there a reward? If that's true, then I should do it. Even if it's like, I don't want to write this copy today, or like I have this conversation I have to have that I'm scared to ask for, whatever it is, right? So that's the first myth. It doesn't have to feel good to get what you want. In fact, it has to be the opposite, and not in a negative way, just in a way that understanding that feeling is part of the whole thing. The good, the bad, the icky, and the fabulous. The second thing that I think is a myth that a lot of people, that's confusing a lot of people about, is it worth it? Is that there's some type of like blueprint that is going to work for everybody. And the truth is, I do believe in structure, blueprint, frameworks. I do believe in those. But if you are blindly applying anything without your own special sauce, your own stories, that's very important, because guess what? No one has your story. You're the only one who has your story. That's the ultimate differentiator. There is nobody else who has your story. But people love to hear stories, they love to tell stories, and they love to see themselves in your story, and vice versa. So the problem with today is that because people want the just add water, potion, lotion, magic wand solution, they are not applying their own special ingredients to a framework that is best practice. And so back to, is it worth it? It's worth it if you go, I'm going to learn the best practice, I'm going to add my special sauce, and I'm going to actively and intentionally do the work that is required to even test, is this in alignment with my values? So that's my answer. And I think also, here's the other thing. One last thing I want to say about it is, if you choose not to do anything, good for you, because you're the only one who has to live with the consequence of it. Remember that we have free will. That's what makes us different than the rest of the animals on this earth. Okay. It's the only thing that makes us really different. And so the fact that we have free will, but just make sure that you're not bullshitting yourself. That the only reason that you're pooping out or stopping before the breakthrough is because you're lazy. You're lazy, and your values deserve you, and the world deserves change that you get to be a catalyst for in your own way. And so, yeah, I mean, entrepreneurship, I call entrepreneurship, it's like entering the gym every day. It's like you don't get bigger muscles by just standing there. They don't happen just by your brain going, make a bigger muscle, make a bigger muscle. No, you have to actually work, and it's hard as hell to lift bigger weights. But then over time, you're strengthened, you are stronger, you can break through things faster, and so is it worth it? I don't know. Have you grown your muscles enough to really know? I would say grow your muscles a little bit more, and then we'll see. Then you'll really know. And then if you really have grown your muscles and it's not for you, that's a great time to say, I'm done with this. But if you do it before you've actually gotten into the gym, you're probably letting yourself down. So that's it.
Well, Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for coming onto the show today and sharing this time with me and with everybody. It's been very, very special. And I just have one more question for you, and I want to be respectful of your time. But I just want to say thank you. And I want to ask this last question specifically from my perspective, and just to give you a little bit of context. I'm 24. And I really want to know, what question should I be asking you that I just wouldn't think to ask?
Such a good question. And I'm a little overwhelmed by the fact that I'm old enough to be your mother, Ben. So I want to tell you to ask a question that I wouldn't tell my daughter, who's 22, she'd be like, Mom, really? What's a question? I think I would love to be asked. No, I would love to be asked, not think. I would love to be asked, what do I think the generations after me, what can they do to help move humankind forward? Like, what are the real things that will support that? And I also would love to hear, kind of as an additional thing to that, is like, as the next leaders, what's your advice to the next leaders as we're coming up and affecting the world?
Can you give us the answers to those questions, please?
Such a good question. I love that you asked that. That's juicy. Well, this is what I want to say. I am so excited about the current leaders, people like you, Ben, who have so much access to more technology, more connection than any generation before you. And what I want to ask you to do for me in 30 years from now, well, I hope I'm around still 50 years. So I'll just say like 100 years from now, when my meat sack is no longer on this plane of existence, that you don't forget that connection is best done in person, or at least live. I believe that my friend Jim Quick said this thing at a talk, and I was like, that is it right there. And he said, there are three things absolutely happening in the world that we can't get around. That's happening. It's not going to go away. There's no way to avoid it. And that is the three A's: automation, artificial intelligence, and Asians. Meaning, we are going to be outsourcing a lot of our connection to those three things. And we already are doing it. It's already happening. It's been happening actually for decades, couple decades now. Actually, my generation started it, to be honest with you. Like, it was our age that, again, I started at the brink of the technological revolution. And so I've been able to see that. But as you guys move forward, don't let those A's get in the way of connecting in person. Still experience your life fully. Don't delegate your life to an outside thing. I believe that where we're going in the future, it's actually, the future is now, to be honest with you, but leaders today, people like you, Ben, and your counterparts, the opportunity is actually to teach each other how to connect in person, belly to belly, heart to heart, because people are going to feel like they're living in almost like a generic cold world, because everything's going to be taken care of. And so that's where entitlement comes from. The word entitlement is, and I know millennials get told a lot, they're the entitled generation, but actually you are. And if I didn't put a negative spin on it, it's you are, because actually everything's pretty accessible now. There's nothing you can't access, right? Information is not just abundant, it feels infinite right now, And so what I want for future generations to know, that my great grandchildren are still hanging out and having family potlucks, that they're still experiencing deep recesses of the world, that we actually can, you're the generation and after that can solve the problem that, only X percentage of the world has access to clean water. I mean, these are problems that should not be fucking problems. They're not fucking problems that should exist anymore. And yet we've created that. So I see, once we handle the issue of, here's the thing that's happening too, just one more thing is, like, I don't know if you've heard this, and it's going to be old news 100 years from now, but I'm going to say it now, is one thing that's absolutely going to happen is they're talking about the universal pay. Have you heard about this? So the governments of the world, and some governments, especially the United States, don't like it because we're capitalists, right? We are the kings of capitalism. And I said kings, not queens, because I'm clear. It's a patriarchal thing, okay? They're talking about a universal pay system, so that, because what's happening, the reason there's so much tension around giving up what's old, like coal mining and things that, like, when we can get our power from the sun, and all that. There are basically, the governments are getting together. This isn't in the media a lot, but if you really search, it's there. They're talking about enacting a universal pay scale, meaning, so especially in the Western world, where we have the advantages that most of the world doesn't have. Basically, everybody gets paid a living wage. Okay. But that doesn't mean entrepreneurship is going to go away. It's actually, the entrepreneurships are even going to emerge more, because creativity and innovation comes from the entrepreneurs. But the people in the middle, the people who voted because they're scared that their old way of life is dying, and it is. So sorry, guys, I'm sorry, but it's dying. And the millennials also are the most open generation. You guys are open in terms of both even questioning religion, questioning gender fluidity, questioning sexuality, questioning the way the business or politics runs. You guys are the great questioners of the world now. And this universal pay concept is going to actually eliminate the fear of the middle American, if you will, or the middle class, because now the middle class isn't going to be so worried that they can't survive past. That's the worry. That's why they vote weird or whatever. Like, that's where all the fears come. But if you take care of that, then what's going to be left? People are going to be bored, Ben. They're not going to know what the hell to do with their lives, because they won't have to work so hard, right? So your generation is going to have to find even more high experience, high potent, high living ways to enjoy and love life. People are going to be scared because they won't know what to do without work, and so these are your opportunities. And so I'd like you to all listening, and if you're in the age range of Ben or my daughter, Michaela, who's 22, to know that I'm so excited about how, you guys frustrate me now, I'm not going to lie, but I'm so excited for what you guys are going to create, because to me, your generation is so in alignment with my values. Autonomy and justice. You guys are already demonstrating how important that is to you. So I feel like a little anointed millennial, even though I'm not. I just live vicariously through you guys. But I'm really, really excited about that opportunity for you. So thank you for keeping that going, because we need that. And the rest of the world will have actually better access, I think, once we flatten some of the things. And it's weird, because I got to tell you, I just got to say one more last thing, is that I am big time capitalist, meaning but I'm a social capitalist. Dirty green money will never make me treat another human being less than. Okay. And you can love money and appreciate the resources that it gives you, and still be a giver, a helper, a lover, a builder. I believe in that world. I believe in a world where we can be innovative, where everybody can be wealthy in their bank account and wealthy in their spirit. And I believe in that world, and I am that person. And so I believe that the more that this next generation can have that abundant mindset, but also not be bypassing the truth and keeping the status quo the same, which is, 2% of the people get the money and 98% don't. That's the world that I think you guys are going to flatten. So I hope you keep continuing to do that. And because people go, "You're such a socialist," and I'm like, no, I don't buy into that type of title. I'm a social capitalist. That's how I look at it. And I don't mind I think the middle class, they're not entrepreneurs. They deserve to just get paid a real wage. I'm happy to help pay for that as an innovator, as long as it happens, as long as there's no corruption in it. And so we'll see, but I think you guys can help shape politics going forward, to help us do that. So that's that.
Well, again, I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show, and for really speaking your mind, and talking about these things with me, and creating this experience for us and everybody who is watching and listening. So I just want to acknowledge you and say thank you very much for being you, and for coming on the show today. Thank you.
Thanks for your thoughtful, curious questions, Ben.
Well, thank you again. And to everybody who's watching and listening, whenever you're watching and listening, I want to say thank you all very, very much. Your time is very valuable too. So I'm grateful that y'all would choose to share it with us today. So thank y'all for sticking around all the way till the end. I know you got a lot to chew on. So, I'm I'm so grateful for y'all, and thank you for being a part of this experience. So thank you again, Jen, and I'll see y'all on the next